Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Monday night. Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. In case you missed it earlier today, just a couple hours ago, we had a wonderful guest on AT Live, Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson. He's been on the show before. He just happened to be visiting his younger brother, my Rabbi Yekusiel Kalmanson, here in LA. And I grabbed him and put him on the show. He's published 5 books, wonderful books, Positivity Bias, Seeds of Wisdom, and today spoke about his new book, People of the Word. Really great conversation, a very practical and useful conversation about using the tools that Judaism and Jewish tradition provides to really make a positive difference in your life. Joy, productivity, what it means to be stiff-necked, and particularly with Passover coming up, the connection to what does the word Mitzrayim, Egypt, mean? What do we learn from the word Paro, Pharaoh? And a connection that I just hadn't made before, that it's the same letters that spell Paro that spell Oref, neck, right? So when you talk about that, the Jews are a stiff-necked people, and Nina and I like to say, why were the Jews chosen? Because if we could, make a teshuvah, make a change in ourselves, make a self-improvement, make a repair, if we can make that kind of teshuvah, that kind of atonement, and elevate ourselves by doing the work that is necessary to make atonement and to elevate oneself, well, then anybody could do it. And that's the stubbornness, the stiff-neckedness of the Jewish people. And in fact, to be stiff-necked, right, is about the oref, and that's the same letters that spell paro, right? So the neck is the connection between the mind and the heart. It gets constricted, right? Mitzrayim also means a place of constriction. And so, the basic idea is that we allow our own paros, right? Our own self-destructive behaviors to get in the way of that connection between the mind and heart, and to overcome that stiff-neckedness, as it were. Judaism provides the tools to do that. You want to see that conversation between me and Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson? It's on the Facebook page, and we'll get it on the website soon. Okay, today, who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Paul in Minneapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, Ira in Greenville, South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Joe in the Inland Empire, John in Maine. Ira, my cat loves the bird sounds. So does Sharon, she's always telling us. Renee in Indiana, Carolyn in Washington. There's Sharon. Lila Toe from Lebanon, New Jersey, along with my Havruta partner, Kat Sai. Wonderful to have you here, Sharon. Sharon is sponsoring our show today. James in Indianapolis, Joseph in Massachusetts. Late because I was listening to the beginning of the rabbi's talk. You really want to catch that. Karen in Northern California, Shandora in the Bronx. Belle says, I didn't get a notification. I watched yesterday's daf on replay as I was holding a new granddaughter while you were live. Thanks again. Mazel tov on the new granddaughter. What a wonderful thing. May she grow to Torah, chuppah, and good deeds. Masim tovim. Jonathan, wishing everyone a happy Passover. David in South Bend, Indiana. Welcome over there on the YouTube side. Ella saying shalom. Marjorie saying shalom. Aoife in Florida. Marie saying shalom to Sal and Nina. Charles checking in from Omaha. Welcome, everyone. Today's episode of AT Daily sponsored by our very own Sharon Frant Brooks. I would like to sponsor today's daf in honor of my 4 times high birthday. I know this came in a couple of weeks ago, and I apologize, Sharon, that I'm a little late sharing it here. I've been just obsessed cutting the movie, Cutting Man in the Long Black Coat, and I just let everything slide. Last night, I completed the rough cut. Thank God. We're so excited about the movie. And today, I got into my literally 800 emails that I was behind on. But at any rate, Sharon, may you be blessed. Just as you've lived this 4 times high years, may you live another 4 times 18, or at least to 120. And may they be years filled with health and joy and meaning. And we thank you so much for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of AT Daily, head over to accidentaltalmudist.org and hit that donate button and indicate that you'd like to sponsor an episode. Even if you don't say you want to sponsor an episode, you'll sponsor an episode if you donate there. Great to have you all with us. Today's daf, wonderful timing. I actually mentioned this on my conversation with Rabbi Kalmanson earlier. Of course, as the Accidental Talmudist, at Accidental Talmudist, we believe there are no accidents. Right? What are we doing right now? Preparing our homes for Passover. We're searching every nook and cranny of the house for chametz. Right? What is chametz? Chametz, bread is the most obvious kind of chametz, but anything that is made out of a grain product that has the capacity to rise, to leaven. Right? And spiritually, this is likened to haughtiness, arrogance, right? We puff ourselves up. So when we search our homes for chametz, the spiritual practice is to go through each room and ask yourself, in this room, when and how did I act in an arrogant manner? What were the consequences of that arrogance? What am I going to do to try to remove that arrogance from myself? Arrogance is a very, very dangerous commodity to be carrying around. It's quite natural. We're all human, and there's going to be times when we act arrogantly, but that's something that we need to strive to break free of, right? That's the kind of growth that we are doing as we overcome our stubbornness and stiff-neckedness, as it were. And today's daf is all about arrogance, the dangers of arrogance, how to address arrogance within ourselves. We are on page 5 of Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 1 and discussing Mishna number 1. And this is all about the Sotah, right? The Sotah is the suspected adulteress. And in this Mishnah number 1, we're talking about the procedure that kicks in the Sotah procedure, as it were. A husband warns his wife because a spirit of jealousy comes into him, and he says, this man that you've been interacting with, do not seclude yourself with that man, right? The husband is concerned that his wife is going to cheat on him. He's going to have an affair. He's going to commit adultery. And so he warns her, do not seclude yourself with so-and-so, a particular man. And he has to do that in front of 2 witnesses. And if she then secludes herself with that man she was warned not to seclude herself with, and that seclusion was witnessed by 2 witnesses, so at that point, she becomes a Sotah. She becomes a suspected adulteress because she did not heed the warning of her husband, which was given in front of 2 witnesses, and then she was witnessed secluding herself with this potential lover anyway. So at that point, the husband and wife become prohibited to each other. They are not allowed to be together as man and wife until she drinks the bitter water in the temple. It goes through the Sotah ritual. And if she's innocent, and then she drinks that water that has some ink from some parchment with those Torah verses written on them and a little bit of dirt from the temple floor, and if she's innocent, she'll be fine, and then the husband and wife will become permitted to each other again. And we've been getting into the nuances of the warning, the seclusion, the witnessing, etc. So here, page 5a, okay, here on page 5a, we pick it up right near the top. Now, so yesterday we touched on this subject of arrogance briefly because we were talking about some verses that we were using to prove, how many witnesses are necessary to the warning, to the seclusion, etc. And kind of in passing, we touched on some lines from the Torah and from Psalms and Proverbs about arrogance, and now the Gemara is going to get a little bit deeper on this important topic. So the Gemara previously discussed the impropriety of the trait of arrogance. Now, the Gemara discusses the source of its prohibition, right? Arrogance is prohibited. From where is this warning derived? I.e., what is the source prohibiting the behavior of the arrogant? And Rava says that Zeri says the source is from the verse, Jeremiah 13:15, hear you and give ear, be not proud, for the Lord has spoken. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that the warning comes from here, Deuteronomy 8:14. Then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God. Right? God warns the Jewish people that now you're entering the promised land, but here in the desert where I'm feeding you manna every day, and my presence is visible in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Okay, you're not going to think so much of yourselves, but once you enter the land and you start farming the land, and I've removed the immediate evidence of my presence among you, and you start to believe that it's the work of your hands and your accomplishments, and some of you are going to really succeed, and you're going to think that it's all about you and not the gifts that I gave you, right? And then you're going to become arrogant, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God. And it is also written in the same passage, beware, beware, lest you forget the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 8:11. Now the Gemara explains, and these sources are in accordance with the statement that Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Ilya says. As Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Ilya says, wherever it is stated in a verse, beware, lest or not. This is nothing other than a prohibition. Since these verses employ these terms in the context of one who is arrogant, they serve as sources for the prohibition. Right? It's not just advice that the Torah or that Jeremiah is giving you. Don't become arrogant. It's not just advice, right? According to this view, it's an actual prohibition, a negative prohibition. So Rav Avira interpreted the following verse homiletically. They are exalted for a little while. This is from the book of Job, 24:24. They are exalted for a little while, and they are gone. Yes, they are brought low. They are gathered in as all others, and wither as the tops of the husks. And there were times when he said this interpretation in the name of Rav Asi, and there were times when he said it in the name of Rav Ami, that any person who has arrogance within him will ultimately be diminished in standing, as it is stated in the phrase, they're exalted for a little while. Indicating that one who raises himself above others will be exalted only briefly. And lest you say that even if he is diminished, he will still exist in the world and live a full life, the verse states, and they are gone, indicating that they die before their time. Right? Heaven does not smile on the arrogant. They will in fact remove them from this world earlier than their time. And he continues the interpretation. But if a person repents from his arrogance, he is gathered in death at his proper time, like Abraham our forefather, as it is stated in the same verse. Yes, they are brought low. They are gathered in as all others. Kakol, all others. Indicating that when he repents from his arrogance, he will die, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it is written about them that they were blessed with the term all, right? When we say the grace after meals, we mention, may we be blessed with everything, just as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were blessed with everything. And did they have everything? Were they the richest men that ever lived? No, they were comfortable, but they felt like they had everything. Who is rich? One who is content with what he has. With regard to Abraham, the verse states, and the Lord blessed Abraham in all things, Bakol, Genesis 24:1. With regard to Isaac, the verse states, and I have eaten of all, Mikol, Genesis 27:33. And with regard to Jacob, the verse states, Genesis 33:11, and because I have all. And if one does not repent from his arrogance, then the verse in Job continues, and wither like the tops of the husk. Now the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase, and wither like the tops of the husks? What is the spiritual meaning? Rav Hun and Rav Chisda offer differing interpretations. One says that it means like the awn of bristle-like growth on the top of the husk. And one says that it means like the husk itself. And the Gemara comments, granted, according to the one who says like the awn of bristle-like growth, awn, A-W-N, like the awn of bristle-like growth on the top of the husk, that is that which is written in the verse, and wither like the tops of the husks. And since this on the top of the husk, But according to the one who says, like the husk itself, what is the meaning of the expression, and wither like the tops of the husks? And Rav Asi says, and similarly the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, this can be explained by way of an analogy to a person who enters into his field as he gathers the taller stalks before the shorter ones. And the verse is therefore referring to the tallest stalks, not the tops of the stalks, right? Some say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Some say the squeaky wheel gets cut off the cart, right? So the idea is that the ones who elevate themselves above others, and the Grim Reaper, as it were, that's not a Jewish idea, but they're going to be harvested first, right? They're going to be cut off first because they elevated themselves above others. So the Gemara continues a discussion of arrogance and its converse, humility. Great is humility. Our greatest teacher, the greatest prophet who ever lived, Moses, was also known as the humblest of all men. So great is humility. And the verse states, for thus says the high and lofty one that inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, also with him that is of a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. Isaiah 57:15. What a beautiful image. God, who is the loftiest of all and dwells on high in eternity in a supernal way that we can't even begin to imagine, right? God's greatness is not even within our capacity to imagine what that greatness is. But where does God dwell on earth? With the contrite, with the humble. Those who are contrite and humble and pour their hearts out before God are closest to God, meaning God is closest to them. And Rav Hun and Rav Chisda offer differing interpretations of this verse. One says that the verse means together with me is the person who is contrite and humble. In other words, God elevates the humble. And one says that the verse means I, God, descend and am found together with the person who is contrite and humble. I'll just share quickly on a personal note. I've mentioned a few times, my mom died last September, so I'm in the year of Avelis. And so I say Kaddish every day, 3 times a day. I go to services. I go to synagogue in the morning and in the evening when we do the afternoon and evening service together. And I'm there to say Kaddish, but it's also a merit to the departed parent if the son can step up and lead the prayers. Now, it took a lot of, I had to really talk myself into teaching this class. I felt like, who am I to teach the Talmud? I didn't go to yeshiva. I'm not qualified. But okay, I'm a communicator. I spent 7.5 years studying the Talmud during the first Daf Yomi cycle. I've got, Rav Steinsaltz helping me teach it. So what the heck? I'll just do my best. But leading prayers in a synagogue, that's like even much further outside my comfort zone than teaching this class. My Hebrew is so weak. I didn't grow up, davening and praying alongside the Orthodox Jews and Hasidic Jews that I pray alongside in our synagogue here. And for me to lead them in prayer, it's just so difficult for me to do that. But I said, for the merit of my mom, I'll just, I'll learn it as best as I can and I'll just do it. And, I always joke with the rabbi, I find a new mistake to make or a dozen new mistakes to make every time that I lead the prayers. And he says, exactly. And we all do. And don't let that stop you. And, the people around me really encourage me and that's been great. But it is humbling. Every time I'm just so, my heart races. It's not easy for me to step up and lead the prayers. I just do it anyway. I've gotten a little better at it. I've gotten a little bit more comfortable. And sometimes I'm up there and I'm thinking, I didn't make a mistake. I'm getting smoother. I'm getting faster. I sound like the other guys when they're leading the prayers. And, I can start to have a moment of getting a little up on myself. Invariably, I'll make a big mistake right away at that point. God very kindly, humbles any kind of arrogance I would have immediately. That's the big kindness of God toward me. But I don't even know why I mentioned that part. What I want to say is there are times when I'm in that, in that synagogue and, I had a big education. I make movies. I teach this class. Nina and I together have this following at Accidental Talmudist. I've learned to do a bunch of things. But, I'm in that synagogue and there's an 8-year-old who grew up in that system and has been learning Hebrew since day one at school. And he davens, he prays with a fluency that I will never have. Right. And sometimes, I have that thought and, I look at that kid and it's like, he's just so much more natural and he has that gift that I'll never have. And I'm just so, I'm really humbled at that moment, right? Like whatever accomplishments I may have in my life, I'm just never going to pray with the fluency that kid has. But I must say that when I have just that kind of a thought, and I say to God, I wish I could pray in Hebrew with like the naturalness that I could pray in English, and I wish I could learn this text and this material that in a way that I'm never going to be able to learn it. It's exactly that moment when I've completely humbled myself that there's like a sadness that goes with it, but at that very moment of that sadness, there's like a closeness to God that I feel because I've opened my heart to God and I've just like abased myself before God that way. And he lifts me up. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like when you completely humble yourself before God, you actually, it's not just like an idea, like an intellectual idea that you're going to be closer to God at that moment. You experience that closeness. Hopefully I've communicated what I was feeling in those moments. It's very special. So pour your heart out to God. Try to recognize your mistakes and faults and shortcomings, and he will lift you up and strengthen you from that place of humility. I felt it, so I recommend it. Okay. Where am I? So that was Job. Okay. And the tops of the husks. And right. So God is with the contrite. That's exactly what I'm describing, right? God is also with him that is of a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. Isaiah 57:15. It's exactly the feeling I'm describing. Now, the Gemara comments on this, and it stands to reason that the meaning of the verse, like the one who says, I am with the contrite person, as the Holy One, blessed be he, disregarded all of the mountains and hills, and rested his divine presence on the lowly Mount Sinai. And he did not choose to raise Mount Sinai up toward him. Right? You would think that when God is going to come into the world and give the Torah, right? He gave the Torah. The Jewish people were there. They were kind of the recipients and received the job of transmitting the Torah to the world, right? So the Jews were kind of standing in for the whole world because the Torah was given to the whole world. And when God gave the Torah to the whole world and he said, I'm going to give it on a mountain, you might think that God would give it on Mount Everest, the tallest of all mountains, as would be befitting the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. But no, he chose a very lowly, humble mountain, not even the biggest mountain in its surrounding area. It's not even the tallest mountain next to its neighboring mountain. It's just a very plain, hill. We could call it a mountain, but it's not so much of a mountain. Many, 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 many taller mountains, more distinguished mountains, prettier mountains. What was it about Mount Sinai? Mount Sinai was a humble mountain. Rav Yosef says a person should always learn proper behavior from the wisdom of his creator, right? This is the commandment, you shall walk in his ways. As the Holy One, blessed be he, disregarded all of the mountains and hills and rested his divine presence on the lowly Mount Sinai. And similarly, when appearing to Moses, he disregarded all of the beautiful trees and he rested his divine presence on a bush, right? The burning bush. He could have made a fiery tree, a big, magnificent eucalyptus that burned and was not consumed. But no, he appeared to Moses in a burning bush. Which bush? There's so many bushes. What about a bush? Just one of the many bushes. That's the one that God chose. It became special because God chose it. Rabbi Elazar says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, it is fitting to hew him down, as a tree designated for idolatry is hewn down. As it is written here with regard to the arrogant, and the high ones of stature shall be hewn down. Geduim, Isaiah 10:33. And it is written there with regard to trees designated for idolatry, cut them down. Cut down their trees that are worshipped as part of idolatrous rites. You should cut them down. Right? When the children of Israel entered the promised land, they were ordered, cut down any trees that were used to worship idols. Because the people of that land, some of the Canaanites, part of their rituals of worshiping idols was to worship these trees, the Asherah trees, and God said, cut down those trees. And Rabbi Elazar also says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, his dust, i.e. his remains in his grave, will not stir at the time of the resurrection of the dead. As it is stated, awake and sing for joy, you who dwell in the dust. It is not stated, you who lie in the dust, which would indicate that all the dead will be awakened in the future, but rather, you who dwell in the dust, indicating that only one who became a neighbor to the dust in his lifetime, by living with extreme humility, will stir at the time of the resurrection. Now, you can almost see, we learn in Tractate Sanhedrin that, all Israel, and then there's another passage there that shows all people have a place in the world to come, except for certain exceptions, right? And then they list some like, not just people that were bad or wicked, but like genocidally wicked. They lose their portion in the world to come. But also those who deny the existence of the world to come, right? People who say, you can say, I don't say, God forbid, but some people say, I don't know, I have trouble believing in God. I don't know, I need evidence. I don't know. Fine. That person is humble. He's saying, I don't know, right? It's somebody who's agnostic. They don't know. The atheist, right? The one who proclaims there is no God, you can see that's an arrogant attitude. To say you don't know, okay, you don't know. How could you know? But to say that it doesn't exist, that there is no God, or that there is no world to come, or that there is no resurrection of the dead, how do you know there is no such thing? For you to make that proclamation as a fact, of course that's arrogant, right? And so why should such a person inherit a place in the world to come who has denied that there is a world to come? Why go out of your way to make such a proclamation? Very, self-destructive. And Rabbi Elazar also says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, his dust, i.e. his remains, will not stir. Wait a minute, I just read that. And Rabbi Elazar says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, the divine presence wails over him. As it is stated, for though the Lord is high, yet regards he the lowly, and from the haughty he is pained from afar. Right? It's not just that God says, oh, that guy is arrogant, boom, cutting him off, right? God cries for such a person. God wishes that person would come back. God doesn't cut him off willy-nilly. That person cuts himself off. Rav Avira interpreted a verse homiletically, and some say that Rabbi Elazar interpreted as follows. Come and see that the attribute of the Holy One, blessed be He, is not like the attribute of flesh and blood. The attribute of flesh and blood is that the elevated sees the elevated, but the elevated does not see the lowly, right? Right? Like rich people want to associate with rich people, right? Arrogant people want to associate with other, self-proclaimed awesome people. That is not how the Holy One conducts himself. The attribute of the Holy One, blessed be He, is not like that. He is elevated, the most elevated, but sees specifically the lowly. As it is stated, for though the Lord is high, yet He regards the lowly. Rav Chisda says, and some say that Mar Ukva says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, He and I cannot dwell together in the world. As it is stated, he who slanders his neighbor in secret, him will I destroy. He who is haughty of eye and proud of heart, him will I not suffer. These verses should be understood as follows. Do not read the verse as oto lo ukal. Rather, read it as ito lo ukal, meaning, with him I cannot bear to dwell. And there are those who teach that this was stated with regard to those who speak slander, because the beginning of the verse states, he who slanders his neighbor in secret, him will I destroy. Now, Rabbi Alexandri says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, and again, this idea, like, remember, these two things go together, right? That God does not want to cut off the arrogant, right? In this sense, God would prefer that the arrogant see the error of their ways, make a teshuvah, humble themselves, and come close to God. That God will open his arms to them, as it were, to anthropomorphize God in a sense. But God is waiting for the arrogant to, lower themselves in their own esteem and to come back into the embrace of God. But those who, sort of maintain their arrogance and stay away, they're cutting themselves off from the source of life. It's not so much that God, punishes them for being arrogant. It's that they cut themselves off from the source that would give them life and joy and meaning, etc. Rabbi Alexandri says, concerning any person who has arrogance within him, even a slight wind disturbs him, as it is stated, but the wicked are like the troubled sea, for it cannot rest, Isaiah 57:20. And if, with regard to the sea, which contains many quantities of quarters of a lug of water, yet a slight wind disturbs it, certainly with regard to a person who has in his body only 1/4 lug of essential lifeblood, all the more so will a slight wind disturb him. In other words, you can, you don't have to lose that much blood before you bleed out, right? And if the ocean is not enough, how much less do we have? So Rav Chia Bar Ashi says that Rav says, despite the opprobrium assigned to one who exhibits the trait of arrogance, a Torah scholar must have, what? What must a Torah scholar have? 1/8 of 1/8 of arrogance. A 64th measure of whatever an arrogant person has. A Torah scholar should have no arrogance whatsoever, except he should have this tiny little bit. 1/64th of the arrogance of an arrogant person. Why? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said, and this minute measure of arrogance crowns him as the awn of bristle-like growth on the top of a husk. And Rav said a Torah scholar who has arrogance should be excommunicated. And one who does not have arrogance at all should be excommunicated as well. As such, he must have only a minute measure of arrogance, but not zero. Why? Because a Torah scholar has to uphold the honor of the Torah, right? So in other words, like a soldier has to have no arrogance, right? He is fighting for his country. He has to, be at all times mindful that his role is to serve and save the nation. But he also has to, uphold the integrity of his uniform and of his rank, right? And so he has to be willing to give orders to the people that he outranks, or the army won't work. And likewise, a Torah scholar must guard the honor of his station, because he has learned Torah, because he spends his time learning Torah. He has to, just have enough arrogance to uphold the honor of that. But it's a very tiny measure, right? A very tiny measure that he needs. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, even a Torah scholar should not have any arrogance or any part of arrogance, not even 1/8 of 1/8. And he explains why arrogance should be avoided entirely by asking, is it a small matter that it is written with regard to arrogance? Everyone that is proud of heart is an abomination to the Lord? And Chizkiah says, the prayers of a person are heard only if he casts his heart to be like flesh, by being free of arrogance. As it is stated, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbos to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says the Lord. Right? Everyone will recognize that there's only God, and then everyone will lower themselves and be humble. Rabbi Zera said, concerning tsuras of the flesh, we've talked about many times, the physical expression of that spiritual condition, which no longer exists, but did when the temple was standing. Tsuras, skin blemishes that are related to lashon hara, right, about gossiping and other, wicked use of the tongue. So Rabbi Zera said, concerning tsaras of the flesh, it is written in the verse with regard to it, and when the flesh has in the skin thereof a boil, and it is healed. But concerning the tsaras of a person, it is not written in the verse with regard to it, and it is healed. Both verses discussing the tsaras of a person make no mention of healing. Wait, what? Both verses discussing tsaras of a person make no mention of healing at Leviticus 13:2 and 13:9. Just the tsaras of the flesh, right? They don't say that tsaras of a person is healed. They say that tsaras of the flesh is healed. That's a distinction that's being made. And this indicates that one who sees himself as flesh will be cured, but one who holds himself in high regard will not be cured, right? In other words, people who understand that, I'm a soul, I'm a spark of God, we all are, but this soul is riding around in a body that is constantly screaming for its animal needs, and that's why I make mistakes all the time. When I recognize that, I humble myself. When I just think of myself in terms of my name and my identity and my achievements, now I'm headed toward a place of arrogance. Rabbi Yochanan said, the Hebrew word for person, Adam, right? Like Adam, the first man, that word Adam is also a word just for a person, is written Aleph Dalet Mem. And this is an acronym for Efer, dust, Dam, blood, and Mara, bile, alluding to man's insignificance, right? He's just made of dust, blood, and bile. Similarly, the Hebrew word for flesh, basar, is written Beis Sin Resh. And this is an acronym for busha, shame, serucha, putrid, and rima, worm, also alluding to the insignificance of a man. And there are those who say that the letter sin of the word basar actually is referring to a different word, sheol, the netherworld, as it is written with the Hebrew letter shin. And the letter shin is phonetically similar to the letter samech, the first letter of the word serucha, but is orthographically similar to the letter shin, the first letter of the word sheol. And the dispute is whether the acronym should be based upon the pronunciation or upon the way that it is written. Now, Rav Ashi says, but this idea, right? So we have another teaching elsewhere that a person should always carry 2 slips of paper, at least metaphorically, in his pockets, right? One says that this whole world was created for me, right? That every soul is precious to God, and this whole world that's riding around is like created so that what I do and the good deeds that I do and the good choices that I make, right? It's like the whole world is a stage for me to fight that battle to make good choices every day. That's a slip of paper in one pocket. And in the other pocket is a slip of paper that says, I am nothing but dust and ashes. The same thing we're learning right here, right? And everybody has to carry both. We shouldn't be so humble that we think, well, if I'm just nothing but, maggot food, what difference does it make what I do? No, every choice we make matters, right? Because you're a soul. But don't get so up on yourself that soul is riding around in an animal body. Rav Ashi says any person who has arrogance within him will ultimately be diminished in stature, as it is stated with regard to different types of tsaras. Now we're on 5b. And for a sore, a se'et, and for a scab, a sapachat. And se'et means nothing other than elevated, as it is stated, and upon all the high mountains, upon all the hills, they are lifted up, nisaot. Isaiah 2:14. And sapachat means nothing other than an appendage, as it is stated in the context of the curse given to the descendants of Eli. Put me, sefacheni, I pray of you, into one of the priest's offices that I may eat a morsel of bread. 1 Samuel 2:36. They will have to be joined with another priestly family to receive their priestly gifts. One can therefore interpret the verses discussing tsaras as teaching that one who is initially arrogant, se'et, will eventually become a sapachat, diminished in stature. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, come and see how great the lowly in spirit are before the Holy One, blessed be He. For when the temple was standing, a person would sacrifice a burnt offering, and the merit of a burnt offering would be his. Or he would sacrifice a meal offering, and the merit of a meal offering would be his. But with regard to one whose spirit is humble, the verse ascribes to him credit as if he had brought all the sacrificial offerings. How do we know that? As it is stated, Psalms 51:19, the sacrifices, meaning all the sacrifices of God, are a broken spirit. One who humbles himself before God, it is as if he brought all of the korbanos, all of the sacrificial offerings in the temple when the temple was standing. And not only that, but this person who humbles himself before God, his prayer is not despised by God. As it is stated at the end of the verse, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi also says, whoever appraises his ways in this world, i.e. whoever carefully considers all his actions before deciding on the proper mode of conduct, merits and sees the salvation of the Holy One, blessed is he, as it is stated, Psalms 50:23, and to him that orders his way aright will I show the salvation of God. Do not read it as Vesam, that orders, rather read it as Vesham, Derek, that appraises his way. And the Mishnah teaches how does he issue a warning. Now we're back to, so that concludes our digression on the danger of arrogance and how to address our arrogant selves and to humble ourselves, the great reward for humbling ourselves before God. Now we return to the subject of our Mishnah, the husband who warns his wife not to seclude herself with a particular man because a spirit of jealousy has come into him. So the Mishnah teaches, how does the husband issue a warning to her in an effective manner? If he says to her in the presence of two witnesses, do not speak with that man called so-and-so, and she nevertheless spoke to that man, she is still permitted to engage in sexual intercourse with her husband, meaning the Sotah procedure has not been triggered, right? Do not speak to that guy, and then she speaks to that guy, nothing has happened. Maybe it's not good for their marriage, but she does not become a Sotah. She does not become a suspected adulteress. However, if after he told her not to speak with so-and-so, she entered into a secluded place and remained with that man for sufficient time to engage in sexual intercourse, she is forbidden to her home, meaning to engage in sexual intercourse with her husband from that moment until she undergoes the Sotah rite. That is not the law. Right? The warning has to say, don't seclude yourself with that man, and then she secludes herself with that man. The warning can't say, don't talk to that man, and then she secludes herself with him. That's not an effective warning, as the Gemara will show. This matter itself is difficult. You said in detailing the words of the warning that he said to her in the presence of two witnesses, do not speak with the man called so-and-so, apparently indicating that speaking is tantamount to seclusion. Therefore, speaking with that man should result in the woman being forbidden to her husband. But then the Mishnah teaches if she nevertheless spoke with him, she is still permitted to her home, i.e. to engage in sex with her husband. And if she is the wife of a priest, she is still permitted to partake of teruma, apparently indicated that speaking is nothing. Therefore, issuing a warning to her not to speak with a particular man should not qualify as an effective warning. And Abaye said in explanation, this is what the Mishnah is saying. If he said to her, do not speak with so-and-so, and she later spoke with him, or if her husband said to her, do not speak with so-and-so, and she later secluded with him, it is nothing, as this is not an effective warning. Similarly, if he said to her, do not seclude yourself with that man, and then she spoke with that man, she is still permitted to her home. She has not violated the warning. However, if he issued a warning to her specifically, don't seclude yourself with so-and-so. And then she secluded herself with so-and-so, and for the amount of time necessary to begin the act of intercourse, and that was witnessed, both the warning and the seclusion, then she would become prohibited to her husband until she drinks the bitter water. The Mishnah teaches that after a woman who was warned by her husband not to seclude herself with another man, nevertheless secludes herself with another man, she becomes forbidden to her husband. And then what about if he dies before she drinks the bitter water? Then what happens? And if her husband dies childless before she drank the bitter water, she performs chalitza with her late husband's brother and does not enter into levirate marriage, right? So when we did Tractate Yevamos, we learned that if a Jewish man and woman are married and they don't have children and he dies and he leaves a brother, So then it falls to the brother to marry the widow. Now, normally a widow cannot marry the brother of her deceased husband. It was forbidden. She's never going to be allowed to. She's married to one guy. She can never marry his brother, even if her husband dies, unless he died having left no children. Then it's actually a commandment that the widow and her brother-in-law marry, unless they don't want to, right? Unless they don't want to. Now, if they don't want to, they're not free to go marry other people until they perform the ceremony of chalitza, right? So it's a ceremony. They don't have to get married to each other. They should, so that then their first child would become an heir to the man who died before he had children. But if they don't have to, and if they don't, they're free to go their separate ways after they perform chalitza. It's a ceremony where, she takes off his shoe and, people witness this publicly, and then they become free to go their separate ways. So if this man and woman, he dies childless, but before he died, he issued that warning to her, don't seclude yourself with so-and-so, and she did seclude herself with so-and-so, then she's not prohibited to him until she drinks the bitter water. But before she drank the bitter water, the husband died. And he was childless, and he did have a brother. So now, does she marry the brother? No, because she was prohibited to her husband. She's not going to become permitted to her brother. Is she free to just go marry whoever? Not until she performs chalitza. That is what we're learning here. And the Gemara asks, why must she perform chalitza? Let her enter into levirate marriage. After all, although she secluded herself with another man after the warning, there is only an unverified suspicion of adultery. It was never proven. Why should it be prohibited for her to enter into levirate marriage, right, into yibum, with her deceased husband's brother, the yavam? And Rav Yosef said, with regard to a man who divorces his wife because he has found some unseemly matter about her, Deuteronomy 24:1, i.e. he suspects her of sexual impropriety, the verse states, and she departs out of his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, Deuteronomy 24:2. And it is inferred from this that she is free to marry another man, but she is not permitted to marry the yavam. The yavam is not considered another man as he takes the place of his brother. So Abaye said to him, to Rav Yosef, well, that is so, that the Torah explicitly prohibits yibum, levirate marriage in this case, then why does she require chalitza? She should not require chalitza as well, as the verse explicitly permitted her to marry another man, seemingly abrogating the need for chalitza to free her from the bond to the yavam. And Rav Yosef said to him in response, if the husband were alive, would she not require a bill of divorce to permit her to remarry, even though she was forbidden to him? Now as well, she should require chalitza in order to release her bond with the yavam, even though, as the verse indicates, it remains prohibited for them to enter into levirate marriage together. I'm very close to done. If you have questions or comments, get them in, please. And there are those who say that in answer to Abaye's question, Rav Yosef said, the merciful one said, with regard to a man who divorces his wife because he found some unseemly matter about her, and she departs out of his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, indicating that the man should divorce her so that his house not be destroyed by his continuing to dwell with her. And you want to say that she should enter into levirate marriage with his brother? How can it be that the same verse instructing the husband to divorce her would also instruct the yavam to marry her? However, there is no reason to exempt her from performing chalitza. Abaye said to him, if that is so, that the verse would not tell the yavam to marry her, she should not marry another man either, so that the second husband's house be not destroyed by this woman who, apparently, is suspected of cheating or maybe does cheat. And how can it be that the same verse instructing the husband to divorce her would also instruct another man to marry her? And Rav Yosef said to Abaye, do we impose on him an obligation to marry her against his will? Unlike levirate marriage, there's no obligation for another man to marry her. Therefore, the verse is not instructing him to do so, it is permitting him to do so. And that's where we'll leave off. Tomorrow, Tuesday, at regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, we'll do page number 6. Wednesday is Erev Pesach, the morning before Pesach begins that night. We have class at a special time, 10 a.m., so tomorrow's daf is page 6. Wednesday we'll do page 7. But before we get into page 7, we'll very quickly do that last passage of Tractate Nazir that we reserve for that purpose. We'll make a siyum, celebrate the completion of Tractate Nazir, and then we'll make a snack. And with that, we break the fast of the firstborn. If you're a firstborn and you attend the Sudas Mitzvah, right, a meal celebrating the completion of a tractate of study. So then you can eat, and that overcomes the custom, not the law, the custom of the fast of the firstborn, commemorating the salvation of the firstborn on the night of the plague of the firstborn. Right? The Jewish firstborns were saved, the Egyptian firstborns were killed, and that led to the Egyptians finally saying, "Free the children of Israel, let the slaves go." Okay, questions or comments here on page 5? It is. Jonathan, Sal, humility. The point is being on the path. It is just as long in both directions. Like the Sephira Netzach, it is never ending, and the victory is in the journey. Just so. Just so. We're never going to master anything. I remember when I was studying Taekwondo. And eventually I got a black belt in Taekwondo. When I first started learning Taekwondo, I was like, wow. One day, maybe if I stick with this long enough, I'll be a black belt, and like, wow, that would be like mastery of Taekwondo. And as the day approached to actually test for the black belt, one of the things that you had to do was write an essay about what the black belt means to you. And I thought, well, I don't have a black belt. How can I say what the black belt means to me? So in my essay, what I did is I interviewed all the other black belts and the masters and grandmasters at our school. And I said, what does the black belt mean to you? You who have it. And one of the most wonderful answers I got was from an instructor who had, come up in Taekwondo in Argentina and then moved to the United States. And he said to me, when you start studying, the black belt looks like this peak in the distance. Right? You're going to climb the mountain and reach the peak, and that'll be your black belt. And when you actually get the black belt, you realize that what you've reached is the foot of the mountain. And now you start learning with your black belt on, you start to really learn. Like you didn't really learn anything. You're just learning basics. Now you start to put it together, and now you start climbing the mountain. And he said, and if you're very lucky, death will find you working your way over some boulder on the mountainside, right? That you never stopped learning was the idea. Sharon, the burning bush in Hebrew is a sneh. Very similar to the name of Sinai. Thank you, Sharon. Beautiful. Bill, question, or rather a reflection. I wonder if this statement that those who deny the existence of the world to come also includes those who, by their behavior, act as if they never expect to face divine justice for their behavior. I think of the regular lament of the psalmist, of the wicked who lay snares for the poor and the humble and the righteous, and say in their hearts that God does not see. In a way, they too are denying that there is a world to come, because they deny there's going to be any justice that they need fear. Beautiful, Bill. I could not have put it any better. Just so. Just so. Don't conduct yourself, whoever you are. And the truth is, right, the arrogant, the haughty, it's not like it's those evil people over there, and there's a super humble, the most humble, and, we're all, most of us are just somewhere in between, wherever we are. The truth is that sometimes we can be very humble. Thank God we find that. Sometimes God just does it to us. We're brought low. And other times we act like the haughty, the arrogant ones, right? And we ourselves can be all those people, just as when we celebrate the Seder Wednesday night, and we talk about the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not even know how to ask, the 4 children, as if those are 4 kinds of people. But it's also very much a Hasidic and Kabbalistic teaching that all of us, right, we're at different times in our lives, we can be the wise, we can be the wicked, we can be the simple, and we can be the one who's so disconnected that we don't even know we're supposed to be asking a question, right? And we have to constantly inspect our behavior to say, well, which child am I today? Peggy says, Shalom Sal and Nina from Colorado. My birthday today. Yom Huledet Sameach, Peggy. May you be blessed to celebrate many more birthdays to 120. And, what we say is on your birthday, right? In the culture, what happens on our birthday? We receive presents. But really what should happen on our birthday is that we thank those who brought us into the world, and we believe that we have a power on our birthday to transmit blessings from above to those around us. So Peggy, please give us a blessing here in the class that we should all be blessed to learn together and to begin and end, and many tractates, and to keep learning all the days of our life. Please give us a bracha, because you have that power today, Peggy. And finally, off topic, where do the unrepentant sinners go? Where is Hitler? Right. So, there's definitely different opinions on that, right? The whole idea of the afterlife in Judaism is not like just that cut and dry, this is how it works. It's a whole body of thought. And there are definitely, some conflicting and different opinions about this. Somebody like Hitler, who caused so much destruction, so much pain, he's going to suffer. He's going to suffer for what he did. He's going to be held accountable for what he did. And a person like that, could inherit Gehenna, right? That the pain of the fiery, place of refinement, and never leave it. So that, certainly a person like that could end up there. But also it could happen that unrepentant sinners, people who, don't believe there is a world to come, they essentially write themselves out of the story. Perhaps for them, death is the end. Whereas for everybody else who's open, who has some merit that they bring with them into the world to come as well, they're going to be held accountable for the things they did wrong, that what they weren't able to sort of balance with their mitzvahs, with their positive actions in this world. So there's going to be a time of refinement. We're going to be held accountable. We're going to go through that refinement, and then we'll inherit that place in the world to come. And remember, that world to come has kind of infinite gradations. How close you are to the Holy One above. But, the exact disposition of what happens, to the most wicked, I can't define it exactly because there's different definitions of it. But the bottom line, we are going to be rewarded for every positive deed and held accountable for every misdeed. And God willing, the balance will be in our favor. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.